massively,
Massively.
this massive family that is just super important, because we go all the way back to, again, the forming of our nation, and Richard Henry Lee is the president of the Continental Congress after under the Articles of Confederation, and yet creates, again, we create the Constitution, the Bill of Rights under his part of his influence and under his direction, and that's what we have today. And then generations later, we have Robert E. Lee as well. And so, before we get into Robert E. Lee, what more do we want to talk about with Richard Henry Lee? Um, do we want to? Let's see.
I, I think it's important to bring up the topic of slavery and
Okay.
enslaved people. That if you and again, Hamilton is a great play to go to understand some of this tension that occurred as the country was being formed. These men are talking about unalienable rights and equality, and yet many of them own slaves. And they
Right.
own enslaved people. I'm trying to change my language on this. Enslaved people, they were people, and there's a tension there. And the Lees, as I understand it, Richard Henry Lee and Lightfoot Lee, also known as Frank, they understood that conflict, and in a perfect world, that conflict would have been resolved with the formation of the country. We know that it wasn't. They just didn't have the votes. This was a process, right? None of the colonies had to go along with this. Any one of them could have said, "No, we're out," and we couldn't have that. There was only 13 of them. We
Right.
needed everyone. We're going up against the British Empire here.
Right.
So there's a tension there. When you just like today, and when we're passing laws, if you need the votes, sometimes you got to make the compromises to get the votes. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you want. And the same, it was no different. So not enough Southern plantation owners in the other colonies were willing to free their slaves and say, okay, yes, we're going to actually make this statement of equality true for every male, at least, in the country, because that's how they thought of it at the time. And so the Lees were sort of conflicted there, but it kind of went along with it. And as so many did, then they continued to own slaves because enslaved people, because they already had them, and they just kind of went along with it. And that's obviously what led eventually to the Civil War, needed to sort of to resolve all that. And the Lees were just caught up in that, along with many other influential families and leaders. And we just have to acknowledge, these are not perfect people. We put them on pedestals and we say how wonderful their leadership and their courage and all these things, and all of that is very, very true. That did not make them perfect. And certainly, I think the issue of slavery proves that these were men and women who struggled, did their best. We might wish they had done it differently, but we're speaking from our time now in the 21st century. You can't project that on to people in previous centuries and years, and it's just the way that it is. And we just have to kind of acknowledge that. When I was at Stratford Hall, I was pleased to see that there was a tour, a self-guided tour from the perspective of the enslaved people that live there.